Hi, my name is Hope Minde, and I'm going to be taking you through IFRS11 joint arrangements. And this is part 2 of 3, and in this recording we're going to be focusing mainly on classifying joint arrangements. Okay, so classification of a joint arrangement is based on the rights and obligations that parties have in that entity. Alright, so it's important to note whether the arrangement is structured through a separate vehicle or not. In the case where it's structured through a separate vehicle, it could be a joint venture or a joint operation. But then in cases where it's not structured through a separate vehicle, it's a joint operation. So I want us to actually get into identifying those rights and obligations so that we can actually classify a joint arrangement when we actually get to the application examples at the end of this recording. So there are two types of joint arrangements according to IFRS11 paragraph 14, that is a joint venture or a joint operation. Okay, so with the joint venture, the parties have rights to net assets. So it's just basically saying they have a right to the net assets of the entity, right? And then with the joint operation, parties have rights to the assets and the liabilities. So one party owns certain assets and the other party owns certain assets, and then the other party is liable for some liabilities, while the other is also liable for a certain percentage of liabilities based on their agreement. Okay, so I want us to then get down into those rights and obligations that we said you need to consider, right? And actually classifying your joint venture, your joint arrangement into either a joint venture or a joint operation. Okay, so with the joint venture, okay, so joint ventures have to be structured through a separate vehicle, and like we identified earlier, the parties have to have rights to net assets, but you also need to consider the output of the arrangement. Like, how is the output of the arrangement being utilized? Are the parties individually getting a share, or are they actually selling to third parties? So with the joint venture, ventures do not take all of the output. Some of it is actually, the majority of it is actually sold to third parties, right? And the assets and the liabilities actually belong to the joint venture, so you're just basically sharing in profits, so to say. And if we move on to a joint operation could be structured through a separate vehicle or not, right? Okay, so just to jump back a little, what is a separate vehicle? I'm sure if you did your commercial law undergrad, you got to a point where you're saying like structured through a different entity, stipulated that this is a different entity and it's sort of registered. So with joint operation that is structured through a separate vehicle, you need to consider, okay, what are the rights and obligations? So basically the parties will each have rights to assets, liabilities, income, and expenses in an agreed sharing ratio. So maybe the other party brought their assets and the other party brought their own assets, and then the joint venture then purchased additional assets. So each party would keep their assets they brought in. They have the right to that, and the ones purchased by the joint venture, they might decide, okay, fine, let's share it in this way. So they have a specific right in those assets and liabilities. If we compare with the joint venture, the parties don't have rights to individual assets, but rather to the net assets. So if the vehicle was to be liquidated, assets and liabilities would be sold, and then they would then share any, like, the residual, right? But then in case of a joint operation, if it was to be dissolved, each party would just take their own assets, but they would also then be liable for the different obligations that the arrangement has. Okay, so let's then get to output. So usually with with joint operations, the output is usually then given to the operators. So they're basically using this. So it's basically an operation where they're just taking out outputs, right? And it's not really sold to third parties. And then assets and liabilities belong to the operators, not to the operation. So I hope you can see the distinction. So I wanted to jump right into an example. Oh, okay, funding of liabilities of change operation is from the operators. So it links back to A, where you're saying you basically have a right to, okay, so in this case you have an obligation related to the liabilities, like however you decided to share them. Okay, so let's get into application example 1, which says assume that two parties structure a joint arrangement and an incorporated entity. So incorporated entity, we have a separate vehicle here. So in this case, it could either be a joint operation or a joint venture. So we now need to look at the rights and obligations that are actually being derived from this entity by the parties. So let's get into it. So each party has a 50% ownership interest in the incorporated entity, and the incorporation enables the separation of the entity from its owners. And as a consequence, the assets and liabilities held in the entity are the assets and liabilities of the incorporated entity. Okay, so now we need to make an assessment. Is it a joint operation? Is it a joint venture? And we said with a joint venture, you have a right to the net assets. So in this case, because the assets and liabilities belong to the incorporated entity, what the parties have rights to are the net assets, right? But then if this scenario was changed around a little bit, and the contractual agreement actually stated that, you know what, A will be liable for this amount of the liabilities and expenses, and B, okay, so let's say the two parties are A and B, they will also be liable for those liabilities and the specific assets and liabilities that are being shared like that. Confirm that would actually now become a joint arrangement. So it's important to read the scenario and pick out triggers, right? Especially where there's a separate vehicle, because it could go either way. Okay, let's get on to application example 2. And it says, assume that two parties structure a joint arrangement in an incorporated entity. Okay. C, in which each party has a 50% share ownership interest. So in this case, separate vehicle. Yes, could go joint operation or joint venture. At this point, we don't know because we haven't read enough. And then it says the purpose of the arrangement is to manufacture materials required by the parties for their own individual and manufacturing processes. So at this point, we're saying, oh, you know what? The output seems to be used by the parties. Remember, when we're actually looking at rights and obligations, we said, okay, fine. Another factor to consider would be how the output of the entity is being used. And in this case, the arrangement is basically just manufacturing just so that these two parties can actually get the output. They're not selling to third parties. So in this case, it's pointing more towards a joint operation, yes? The arrangement ensures that the parties operate the facility that produces the materials to the quantity and quality specifications of the parties. So it's very particular. It's actually, this is more information supporting that each party is actually going to be getting the output for their own use, right? Okay, so let's consider if the parties then get okay, what are they manufacturing? Okay, the materials that they're manufacturing. And they then get these materials that they're manufacturing and they sell them on to third parties. Does that actually affect our classification? So remember with joint ventures, we say that if you're selling to third parties, but the fact that first it goes to the different entities and then they then decide to sell, even if they're going to sell it straight, still maintains its classification as a joint operation, right? Because the parties to this arrangement are first getting the output. So they're basically just trying to break even. Like when they're manufacturing, they're just trying to cover costs, and then moving on, they then take the materials and do whatever they're using them for. Okay, so the legal form of the entity through the activities are conducted initially indicates that assets and liabilities held in entity C are the assets and liabilities of entity C, right? So in this case, if you just looked at the statement, confirm you'd lean more towards the joint venture and say, okay, this is a joint venture. But because of the above information, you need to consider further facts and circumstances, right? So I want you to go to your standard, look at the paragraphs that refer to where there's a separate vehicle, because they want you to look at legal form and other facts and circumstances, right? So these are the other facts and circumstances that we're considering above. Okay, fine. So we're at the legal form through which the activities are conducted initially indicates that assets and liabilities held in C are the assets and liabilities of C. And we say that the absence of the above information, it would actually make it a joint venture. But because of the information we have above, it's actually a joint operation. The contractual arrangement between the parties does not specify that the parties have rights to assets or obligations for the liabilities of entity C. So as much as it really doesn't specify that, the information above, so considering other facts and circumstances, then drives us away from just concluding that it's a joint venture. Just taking this whole paragraph that's beneath, you could easily have concluded that it's a joint venture. But then there's more information, more facts and circumstances that actually make us realize that, you know what, this arrangement is a joint operation. I hope that this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And yeah, jump into the questions that we've identified on the weekly plans and see if you can actually apply the stuff that we've identified here. Thank you.